Man returns from death with a horrifying message from Jesus. He was a man living on the edge, full of ambition, consumed by success, and never once stopping to think about what truly mattered. But everything changed in an instant. One tragic accident, one moment of life slipping away. And when he returned, he wasn't the same. What was the message that brought him back from the brink? What did Jesus tell him that would alter the course of his life forever? Stay tuned for a journey of transformation, hope, and a call to something greater than himself. This is not just a story of survival, it's a story of divine intervention. A near-death experience that could change the world. The rain pounded against the windshield, each drop a reminder that nothing could be controlled. Kyle Roberts, 29, gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white under the pressure. The road was slick and the night was dark, making the journey home seem endless. A successful lawyer, Kyle had always thought he was invincible, confident, ambitious, and always on the move. His career was his life. Nothing else seemed to matter. He had been working late at the office, closing one last case that would skyrocket his reputation in the legal world. But in his pursuit of success, he had neglected the very thing that kept him going, his faith. He had grown up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and church was a weekly ritual. But in the years since he'd moved to the city, he had distanced himself from God, thinking that his intellect and hard work were the only things that mattered. But that night, as Kyle sped down the highway, something shifted. The world around him seemed to collapse in an instant. The car in front of him braked suddenly, and in that moment, everything slowed down. He reacted too late. His tires screeched against the wet pavement as he veered to the side of the road to avoid crashing into the other vehicle. But the steering wheel locked, and before he could regain control, his car was sent spinning into the guardrail. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled his ears as the world went black. The first thing Kyle noticed when he regained consciousness was the overwhelming silence. It wasn't just the quiet of being alone. It was an eerie, suffocating stillness that surrounded him. There was no sound of the rain, no wind, no faint hum of life, just emptiness. As his eyes slowly opened, he realized he was no longer in the car. He wasn't even on the road. He was floating, hovering above what seemed to be a vast, dark abyss. He couldn't feel his body, couldn't hear his heartbeat. It was as if time itself had stopped. Panic surged through him, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Where was he? What was happening? He tried to move, but his limbs felt paralyzed. The darkness around him was so complete, he couldn't see even his own hands. Suddenly, a light appeared in the distance, small at first, like the faintest glimmer. But as it grew closer, it became more radiant, more powerful. The warmth it radiated was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and it calmed his racing thoughts. The light grew brighter, and soon it was clear that a figure was standing in the center of it. Kyle's breath caught in his chest as the figure stepped forward. It was Jesus. The figure of Jesus stood before him, his eyes filled with compassion, love, and understanding. Kyle's heart thudded in his chest as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. "Don't be afraid, Kyle," Jesus said softly. His voice was gentle, but there was an undeniable authority in it. "You are not here by accident. I've called you to stand before me." Kyle felt his breath catch in his throat. "Why? I'm just a lawyer, a man who's too busy for anything else. I haven't lived a good life. I've put my work above everything else, including you." Jesus smiled, his gaze unwavering. "I know, Kyle, but that doesn't define you. You were chosen for something greater. You have been called to serve in ways you can't yet understand. Your path is not yet complete." Kyle's mind raced, the weight of those words sinking in. He had thought success was his calling, but this felt entirely different. Jesus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet peaceful. "I've given you this second chance for a reason. You've been chosen to carry a message to the world, to show others the way. But it won't be easy. It will require sacrifice, faith, and a willingness to change everything about the life you know." Kyle felt his heart beat faster, his mind reeling with disbelief. "What do you want me to do?" Jesus looked at him with kind, knowing eyes. "I want you to return, Kyle. You will have a chance to start again, but I am sending you back with a purpose, to help others see the light, to spread the message of love, compassion, and salvation. You are not meant to live for yourself anymore." Kyle felt a deep ache in his chest. He had always been so focused on his career, his goals. He had never considered anything beyond that. But now he was being asked to do something bigger than himself. He didn't know if he was ready. "But I'm scared," Kyle whispered. "How can I do this?" "You already have everything you need," Jesus replied, his voice filled with warmth and understanding. "The faith you thought was lost, the strength you've carried with you all these years, these are the tools you will use. Now go, it's not your time yet." The world rushed back to him in an instant. Kyle's eyes snapped open, and he found himself in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors attached to his body. He could hear the beeping of machines, the rustle of nurses and doctors in the background. His head was throbbing, and everything felt surreal. But as the memories of his time in the dark void returned, the message from Jesus still rang in his ears. His heart ached with the weight of it all. He had been given a second chance, a chance to live for something greater. Kyle knew what he had to do. Kyle stared at the ceiling of the hospital room, his heart racing as he replayed the experience in his mind. The encounter with Jesus wasn't just vivid, it was life-altering. He could still feel the warmth of the light, the authority in Jesus' voice, and the overwhelming sense of purpose. But now, as he lay in the cold, sterile environment of the hospital, doubt began to creep in. Had it really happened? Was it just a hallucination, a dream brought on by trauma? The door opened, and a nurse walked in, her soft-soled shoes barely making a sound. She smiled warmly at him. "Good to see you awake, Mr. Roberts. You've been through quite the ordeal." Kyle hesitated before asking, How long was I out?" The nurse checked his chart. "You've been in a coma for 3 days. Honestly, we weren't sure if you were going to make it." 3 days. The words echoed in his mind. To him, it had felt like mere moments in that void. But now, the reality of time passing hit him like a wave. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered under his breath. The nurse looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Kyle shook his head, unsure of how to explain. How could he tell someone he'd stood before Jesus, that he'd been sent back with a message? A week later, Kyle was discharged from the hospital, physically healed but emotionally and spiritually shaken. He returned to his apartment, which now felt eerily quiet. The city buzzed outside his window, the noise of life going on as usual. But for Kyle, nothing was the same. He found himself drawn to his dusty Bible, a relic from his childhood that had sat untouched on a bookshelf for years. As he opened it, a page fell out, a handwritten note from his late grandmother. "Kyle, no matter how far you wander, remember that God is always waiting for you. Seek Him, and you will find your purpose." Tears welled in his eyes as he clutched the note. It felt like a sign, a confirmation that what he had experienced was real. That night, he prayed for the first time in years, "Jesus, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to start, but if you've given me this chance, I'll do whatever you ask." Kyle's transformation wasn't immediate. It began with small changes, a growing desire to help others, to connect with people in ways he never had before. He started volunteering at a local shelter, spending his evenings serving meals to the homeless. One evening, as he handed a bowl of soup to a frail elderly man, the man grasped his hand tightly. "You have a light in you," the man said, his voice trembling. "Don't let it go out." Kyle froze. The words struck a chord deep within him, as if they were a continuation of the message he had received from Jesus. But his journey wasn't without challenges. His friends, colleagues, and even his family began to question his sudden change. "You're throwing away your career," one of his colleagues exclaimed during a heated conversation. "What happened to the Kyle who wanted to make part?" Kyle's response was calm but firm. "That Kyle died on that highway. I'm not the same man anymore." As Kyle's mission to live out his faith grew, so did the opposition. He found himself at odds with the world he once belonged to. The legal world, with its cutthroat nature and moral compromises, no longer felt like home. He resigned from his high-paying job, shocking everyone who knew him. His parents were bewildered. "Kyle, you've worked so hard for this," his mother said. "Why are you throwing it all away?" "Because it's not what I'm meant to do," Kyle replied. "I've been given a message to share, and I can't ignore it." That night, as he sat alone in his apartment, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he was ready to follow it, no matter the cost. One night, Kyle had a vivid dream, a vision of people from different nations and backgrounds, their faces etched with pain and hopelessness. In the dream, he stood before them, speaking words of hope and love. The vision was clear. He was being called to something bigger than himself. Kyle woke up with a newfound determination. He began reaching out to churches, organizations, and individuals, sharing his story and the message he had been given. Slowly, doors began to open. If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Kyle's incredible journey. Kyle's newfound purpose became a beacon of hope for many, but it also made him a target. As he traveled from city to city, sharing his story and the message he had received from Jesus, he began to notice a pattern. At every event, there was someone in the crowd who seemed out of place, someone who didn't belong. At a church in Dallas, a man in the back row stared at him with piercing intensity. At a rally in Chicago, a woman with dark sunglasses seemed to be taking notes on everything he said. Initially, Kyle brushed it off as paranoia, but the signs became too obvious to ignore. One night, after an event in Denver, Kyle returned to his hotel room to find the door slightly ajar. His heart raced as he pushed it open cautiously. The room had been ransacked. His laptop was gone, his notes were shredded, and a single Bible verse was scrawled on the mirror in red lipstick. "Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing but inwardly are ravenous wolves." Kyle's knees buckled. Was this a warning, a threat, or something else entirely? Determined not to let fear stop him, Kyle continued his mission. His next stop was Los Angeles, where he was invited to speak at a conference on faith and societal change. The venue was massive, with thousands of people in attendance. As he stepped onto the stage, a strange sensation washed over him, a mix of exhilaration and foreboding. He began his speech, recounting his near-death experience and the message he had received. The audience was captivated, their eyes wide with wonder. But halfway through, a voice interrupted him. "Liar!" The room fell silent as a man stood up from the crowd, pointing an accusing finger at Kyle. "You're nothing but a fraud, manipulating people for your gain." Security moved to escort the man out, but Kyle raised his hand to stop them. "Let him speak," he said calmly. The man's voice trembled with anger. "If you truly spoke to Jesus, prove it. Tell us something only he would know." Kyle closed his eyes, silently praying for guidance. When he opened them, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Jesus told me that every soul, no matter how broken, is worthy of redemption, even yours." The man froze, his defiance crumbling into tears. How did you know?" he whispered. "I didn't," Kyle replied. "But he does." The crowd erupted into applause, but Kyle knew the real battle was just beginning. Kyle's story began to attract media attention, and with it came scrutiny. Journalists dug into his past, critics labeled him a charlatan, and social media erupted with debates about his authenticity. But what troubled Kyle most were the private messages he started receiving, threats, warnings, and cryptic notes from anonymous senders. One message stood out: "You're treading on dangerous ground. Stop now, or face the consequences." Kyle shared the message with a trusted friend, Pastor Aaron, who had been his spiritual mentor since his transformation. "Do you think this is just intimidation or something more?" Kyle asked. Aaron's face was grave. "The enemy doesn't want the truth to spread. You need to be vigilant, but you also need to trust that God will protect you." One night, after speaking at a small-town church, Kyle's car broke down on a deserted road. His phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. As he sat in the darkness, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer. A black SUV pulled up, and two men stepped out. "Need some help?" one of them asked, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Kyle's instincts screamed danger. "No thanks," he said, trying to sound confident. "I've got it under control." The men exchanged glances before one of them replied, "We insist." Before Kyle could react, they grabbed him and shoved him into the SUV. Kyle was blindfolded and driven to an unknown location. When the blindfold was removed, he found himself in a dimly lit room, facing a man in a tailored suit. The man's demeanor was calm, but menacing. "Mr. Roberts," the man began, "do you have any idea how disruptive your message is? Some of us have spent decades building a world where faith is irrelevant, and here you are undoing it with your little fairy tale." Kyle's heart pounded, but he refused to show fear. "The truth isn't mine to keep silent about," he said. "If you think you can scare me into stopping, you don't understand the one who sent me." The man chuckled. "We'll see how long your faith holds up under pressure." Kyle remained captive for what felt like days, though time seemed to blur in the cold, windowless room. His captors brought him food and water but refused to answer his questions. Each moment alone he prayed, seeking strength and guidance. One night, as Kyle sat in the dim light, the door creaked open. A young man, barely out of his teens, entered with a tray of food. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding Kyle's gaze. "Why are you doing this?" Kyle asked softly. The young man hesitated, glancing at the surveillance camera in the corner. "I don't have a choice," he whispered. "They'll kill my family if I don't." Kyle's heart ached for the boy. "You always have a choice," he said. "Fear binds us, but faith sets us free. Trust in Jesus, he can lead you out of this." The young man swallowed hard, then left without another word. The following night, the young man returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He carried a set of keys and a flashlight. "I can't let them keep you here," he whispered, unlocking Kyle's chains. "Follow me, but stay quiet." Kyle's heart raced as they navigated the labyrinth of corridors. At every turn, he silently prayed for protection. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air. "I can't go with you," the young man said, his voice trembling. "But there's a car waiting for you down the road. Go, and don't look back." Kyle grasped the young man's shoulder. "You've done something brave tonight. Trust in him, and you'll find a way out too." The boy nodded, tears glistening in his eyes, and disappeared into the shadows. Once free, Kyle wasted no time. He contacted Pastor Aaron and shared everything that had happened. "You can't keep this to yourself," Aaron said. "The world needs to know the lengths the enemy will go to silence the truth." Kyle agreed, but knew it was more than just about speaking out. His near-death experience wasn't just a call to spread a message. It was a call to action. Over the next weeks, Kyle partnered with churches, shelters, and humanitarian organizations. He began funding initiatives to combat human trafficking, provide education for underprivileged children, and support families torn apart by violence. Each act of service brought him closer to understanding the depth of Jesus' message. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a responsibility. One fateful day, Kyle was visiting a shelter he had helped establish when an armed group stormed in. Their leader, the same man who had orchestrated his kidnapping, stepped forward. "You should have stayed quiet, Mr. Roberts," the man sneered. Kyle stood firm, his voice unwavering. "You can take my life, but you can't stop the truth." As the situation escalated, Kyle noticed a group of children huddled in the corner. Without hesitation, he stepped in front of them, shielding them with his body. The leader raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the young man who had helped Kyle escape appeared, disarming him in a swift, selfless act. In the chaos that followed, the authorities arrived, apprehending the attackers. Kyle and the children were safe, but the young man had been gravely injured. As Kyle knelt beside him, tears streaming down his face, the young man whispered, "You were right. Faith set me free." Kyle's heroic actions made headlines worldwide, sparking a movement of faith, courage, and compassion. His story inspired countless others to stand up for what was right, even in the face of danger. But the events had taken a toll on him. His body bore the scars of his trials, and his heart carried the weight of those he couldn't save. Yet, through it all, his faith remained unshaken. Kyle returned to the church where his journey had begun, kneeling at the altar. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength to follow your call," he prayed. Years passed, but the story of Kyle Roberts continued to inspire people across the globe. His life, a profound testament to the transformative power of faith, became a beacon of hope for those searching for purpose and courage. The shelters Kyle established thrived, expanding into numerous cities and even across continents. Each shelter bore the same inscription on its walls: "Love is not merely spoken, it is lived." These words, rooted in the message Kyle had received during his near-death experience, became a rallying cry for change. The children he had protected during the fateful attack grew up to become leaders in their own right. Many pursued careers in social work, education, and activism, crediting Kyle for showing them the meaning of bravery and compassion. One child, now a young woman named Maria, founded her own organization dedicated to rescuing victims of trafficking. "Kyle didn't just save me physically," she often said. "He saved my soul and showed me how to live with purpose." Kyle's teachings also reached the political arena. Policymakers began implementing laws inspired by his advocacy, focusing on protecting the vulnerable and ensuring justice for the oppressed. His life became a case study in leadership seminars and faith-based organizations, demonstrating how one person's unwavering faith could ripple through society, creating lasting change. But for Kyle, his true legacy wasn't in the shelters, the laws, or the accolades. It was in the countless quiet moments when people found the courage to stand up, to forgive, to love, and to believe. In his later years, Kyle's health began to falter. The physical scars and emotional weight of his experiences took a toll, but his spirit remained indomitable. He spent his days writing, sharing his thoughts on faith, love, and the challenges of living a meaningful life. His memoir, From Death to Life, A Journey of Faith and Purpose, became a bestseller, reaching millions. Despite his fame, Kyle remained humble. He often visited the shelters he had founded, sitting with the residents, listening to their stories and offering words of encouragement. His presence was a reminder that greatness wasn't in towering over others but in walking beside them. As his 90th birthday approached, Kyle gathered with friends, family, and supporters for a celebration of his life. But Kyle, ever focused on others, used the occasion to inspire. "The greatest gift you can give me," he said to the crowd, "is to live with purpose, to love without fear, and to trust in the message of Jesus. If my journey has taught me anything, it's that life is too precious to be wasted on anything less." When Kyle passed away peacefully in his sleep a few months later, the world mourned. His funeral was attended by thousands, with millions more watching online. People from all walks of life, those he had directly helped, and those who had been inspired by his story, came to pay their respects. In his final message, a video he had recorded for the occasion, Kyle spoke to the world one last time. "Death taught me that life is a gift, and faith taught me how to use it." Don't wait for a second chance like I had. Live your purpose now. Be the light in someone's darkness and trust that love will always triumph. Thank you for being a part of my journey. Kyle's death became the catalyst for an even larger movement. His story continued to be shared in schools, churches, and homes worldwide. Artists painted murals of his journey, musicians wrote songs about his resilience, and filmmakers turned his life into a powerful movie that inspired millions more. The shelters he founded expanded further, partnering with global organizations to combat human trafficking, provide education, and offer refuge to those in need. His foundation, the Light of Life Initiative, became one of the most prominent humanitarian organizations in the world, carrying his mission forward. Kyle's journey may have ended, but his mission continues. Now it's up to you. If Kyle's story moved you, here's how you can be part of his legacy. Like this video to show your support for stories that inspire change. Comment below on how this story has touched your heart or motivated you to act. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, courage, and transformation. Most importantly, live with purpose. Be the light in someone's life. Let Kyle's message be a reminder. Life isn't measured by what you take, but by what you give.